I built his empire from nothing, but he erased my name from every story.
To true vision that defines our future.
To true vision
That defines our future.
For 20 years, I stayed silent while he took credit for my work. Then came his wedding day, the day I finally spoke
And
up.
that was the moment I created the algorithm.
What happened next shocked everyone, including me. If you've ever felt invisible, overlooked, or had someone steal your thunder, this story will hit you right in the heart. Make sure you're subscribed and hit that notification bell because stories like this need to be heard. Let's dive in. My name is Jasmine Parker, and I want to tell you about the day I decided to stop being invisible. But to understand that day, I need to take you back to where it all began, Detroit, 2003. I was 32 years old, a single mother with a Harvard MBA and a dream that felt impossible. You see, I had this idea, this algorithm that could predict market trends with scary accuracy. I'd been working on it for years, staying up late after my daughter went to bed, running calculations on my old laptop until my eyes burned. But in Silicon Valley, nobody wanted to hear from a black woman from Detroit. Door after door slammed shut. Meeting after meeting ended with polite smiles and empty promises. Then I met David Sterling. David was different from the other tech bros I'd encountered. He was desperate for one thing. His startup was hemorrhaging money, his investors were pulling out, and he was maybe 3 months away from losing everything. When I walked into his cramped office in Palo Alto, he didn't look at me like I was an outsider. He looked at me like I might be his salvation. I showed him my algorithm. I explained how it could revolutionize predictive analytics, how it could save his company and transform the entire industry. David's eyes lit up like Christmas morning. He understood immediately what I was offering him, not just a lifeline, but a rocket ship to the stars. "This is incredible," he said, leaning back in his chair. "This could change everything." We shook hands that day, a simple handshake, nothing written down, no lawyers involved, just two people making a deal based on trust. I would give him my algorithm, help him implement it, and we would build something amazing together. He promised me recognition, partnership, and a share of the success that would follow. I believed him. The first few months were magical. My algorithm worked even better than I'd hoped. The company went from failing to thriving almost overnight. Clients were lining up, investors were throwing money at us, and the tech world was buzzing about David's revolutionary new approach to predictive analytics. But something strange started happening. In the early days, David would introduce me as his co-founder, his brilliant partner, but gradually, subtly, my titles started to shift. I became the head of analytics, then the senior consultant, then just part of the team. When journalists called for interviews, David would take them alone. When clients wanted to meet the genius behind the algorithm, David would schedule solo meetings. "You're too valuable to waste time on publicity," he'd tell me. "Let me handle the media circus while you focus on the technical work." It sounded reasonable, it felt reasonable. After all, I was never comfortable with attention anyway. I was happier in the background, making sure everything ran smoothly while David played the role of the charismatic CEO. But slowly, my discomfort grew into something else, a creeping realization that I was being erased from my own story. The first patent application came through in 2004. David's name was on it, only David's name. When I confronted him about it, he looked genuinely confused. "Jasmine, you know how these things work. I'm the CEO, the company owner. The patents have to be filed under the company's name, and that means my name, but you know I couldn't have done this without you." I wanted to believe him, I needed to believe him, so I did. Years passed. The company grew from a startup to a major player to a tech giant. David Sterling became a household name, featured on magazine covers, invited to speak at conferences around the world. He was the visionary, the genius, the man who had revolutionized predictive analytics. And me. I was still there, still working, still improving the algorithm that had built his empire. But I was becoming a ghost in my own story. New employees would join the company and never even know I had played a role in creating the technology that made their jobs possible. Board meetings became exercises in watching David present my ideas as his own insights. I'd sit there silent as he explained concepts I'd developed using language I'd taught him. The worst part wasn't the theft of credit, it was the gaslighting. David had a way of making me question my own memories, my own contributions. When I'd bring up the early days, he'd nod sympathetically and say things like, "Of course, you were incredibly helpful in implementing the vision." When I'd mention specific innovations I'd made, he'd smile and say, "Yes, you've always been great at executing the concepts we discussed." Executing, implementing, helping, never creating, never originating, never leading. I started keeping detailed records of everything: emails, meeting notes, development logs. I documented every conversation, every decision, every breakthrough. Part of me knew I was building a case, though I didn't know what kind of case or when I might need it. The breaking point came in 2008. David was being interviewed for a major business magazine, one of those cover stories about visionary leaders. I watched from my office as the photographer set up in the conference room, as David posed with the awards and patents that bore his name alone. The interviewer asked him about his inspiration, about the moment he knew he had something revolutionary. David told the story of staying up late in his garage, working on algorithms, having a breakthrough at 3 in the morning. He described the excitement of realizing he'd cracked the code, the rush of knowing he'd created something that could change the world. It was my story, word for word almost. The late nights, the breakthrough moment, the excitement, all mine, but in his telling, I didn't exist. I had been completely erased from the origin story of my own creation. I went home that night and cried for the first time in years. Not just sad tears, but angry ones, frustrated ones. The kind of tears that come from realizing you've been complicit in your own erasure. I considered leaving. I considered suing. I considered exposing everything. But I also considered my daughter, who was starting high school and dreaming of college. I considered the financial security my job provided, the health insurance, the stability. I considered the fact that David Sterling had armies of lawyers and I had a handful of saved emails, so I stayed. I stayed and I watched as my algorithm made David Sterling one of the richest men in America. I stayed and I watched as he was invited to the White House, as he gave TED Talks, as he was featured in documentaries about technological innovation. I stayed and I became very, very good at being invisible. But invisibility has a cost. It chips away at your soul piece by piece. Every day I walked into that office, I felt a little more like a ghost. Every meeting where my ideas were discussed without my name attached, I felt a little more like I was disappearing. The years blurred together. David's company went public. He bought a mansion in Malibu, a penthouse in New York, a private jet. He dated movie stars and philanthropists. He was named one of Time magazine's most influential people. And through it all, I remained in the background, the invisible architect of his very visible success. Then in 2023, something unexpected happened. David Sterling decided to get married. Her name was Catherine, and she was lovely, an environmental lawyer with a genuine smile and a passion for social justice. They'd been together for 2 years, and honestly, she seemed to make him happy in a way I'd never seen before. When he announced their engagement, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Happy for him, yes, but also something else. A sense of an ending approaching. The wedding was planned for Martha's Vineyard, a spectacular affair with 300 guests. The guest list read like a who's who of tech, entertainment, and politics, and somehow, surprisingly, I was invited. "I want you there, Jasmine," David said when he handed me the invitation personally. "You've been such an important part of this journey. It wouldn't feel right celebrating without you." I almost didn't go. What was the point? I'd spent 20 years watching David celebrate successes that should have been ours, recognition that should have been shared. Why would his wedding be any different? But something made me change my mind. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was a sense of closure, or maybe deep down I knew this was going to be my moment. The wedding was beautiful, the kind of beautiful that only unlimited money can buy. White tents on manicured lawns, flowers flown in from around the world, a string quartet playing as the sun set over the water. I sat in the back, watching as David and Catherine exchanged vows as they promised to be honest with each other, to support each other, to share their lives completely. Then came the reception, the speeches. David's best man told stories about their college days. Catherine's sister talked about finding true love. And then David himself stood up, champagne glass in hand, ready to address his guests. 20 years ago, he began, "I was a failed entrepreneur with a dying company and a dream that seemed impossible. But I had something that most people don't have, a vision of how technology could change the world." I felt my stomach drop. Here we go, I thought, the same story, the same erasure. I spent countless nights in my garage, working on algorithms, trying to crack the code of predictive analytics. And then one night at 3 in the morning, I had a breakthrough. I realized I'd created something that could revolutionize how we understand data, how we predict trends, how we make decisions. The words hit me like physical blows. My garage, my 3 a.m. breakthrough, my creation. Still, after all these years, still mine but told as his. That breakthrough led to everything you see today. The company, the success, the ability to make a difference in the world. It all started with that one moment of inspiration, that one night when I refused to give up on my dream. The guests applauded. David smiled, basking in the admiration, the respect, the love of everyone in that tent, and something inside me just broke. I stood up. I didn't plan to. I didn't think about it. I just found myself on my feet in the back of the tent, my hands shaking but my voice steady. "Excuse me," I said. The tent went quiet. David looked up, surprised, maybe a little annoyed at the interruption. "I'm sorry to interrupt," I continued, my voice carrying across the silent crowd. "But I need to say something." David's face went pale. In that moment, he knew exactly what was coming. "My name is Jasmine Parker," I said, walking slowly toward the front of the tent. "And I need to tell you all the truth about that breakthrough David just described." The silence was deafening. 300 of the most powerful people in the world, and you could hear a pin drop. That garage David mentioned, it was mine, that 3 a.m. breakthrough. That was me, staying up late after my daughter went to bed, working on an algorithm that would change everything. That vision, that dream, that moment of inspiration, it was mine. I reached the front of the tent and turned to face the crowd. Faces stared back at me, some shocked, some confused, some beginning to understand. For 20 years, I've watched David tell this story. For 20 years, I've listened to him describe my work, my innovation, my creation as his own. I've stayed silent because I thought that was the price of stability, of keeping my job, of protecting my daughter's future. I looked at David. His face was a mask of panic and rage, but I can't stay silent anymore. Not when I'm watching him promise his new wife honesty and transparency while standing on a foundation built on lies. "Catherine," I said, turning to the bride, "your husband didn't create the technology that made him rich. I did. Your husband didn't have that breakthrough moment. I did. Your husband didn't build his empire alone. He built it on my work, my ideas, my sleepless nights, and endless calculations." The tent erupted, gasps, murmurs, the sound of 300 people suddenly very interested in their champagne glasses. David stepped forward, his face red with embarrassment and anger. "Jasmine, you're being ridiculous. You're having some kind of breakdown. Security? I have documentation," I said, my voice cutting through his protests. 20 years of documentation. Emails, development logs, meeting notes. I have proof of every conversation, every decision, every line of code. I have witnesses who remember the early days, who remember when you introduced me as your co-founder before you decided I was more valuable and visible. I turned back to the crowd, my voice stronger now, more confident. "I'm not telling you this to ruin anyone's wedding. I'm telling you this because I'm tired of being invisible. I'm tired of watching other people get credit for my work. I'm tired of living in the shadows of my own achievements." I paused, looking around the tent at faces that suddenly seemed to see me for the first time. My algorithm built David Sterling's empire. My work made him a billionaire. My innovations changed the tech industry. And for 20 years, I let him erase me from that story, but not anymore. I walked toward the exit, my heart pounding but my steps steady. "Catherine," I said, stopping at the bride's table, "you seem like a lovely person. You deserve someone who will be honest with you. Ask him about the patents. Ask him about the early days. Ask him about Jasmine Parker." I left the tent and walked to my car, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the keys. Behind me, I could hear the chaos erupting, voices raised in confusion and anger, the sound of chairs scraping as people stood up, the general murmur of a crowd that had just witnessed something extraordinary. I drove home in silence, my mind reeling. I'd done it. After 20 years of invisibility, I'd finally spoken up. I'd finally told the truth, and I had no idea what would happen next. What happened next was everything. The story exploded across social media within hours. Someone had recorded my speech on their phone, and by morning it had millions of views. Journalists were calling, wanting interviews. Other tech workers were coming forward with their own stories of having their contributions erased or stolen. The hashtag #JasmineParker was trending worldwide. David tried to control the narrative, hiring crisis management firms and issuing statements about disgruntled former employees and baseless accusations. But it was too late. The truth, once spoken, has a way of spreading like wildfire. Within a week, major news outlets were running investigative pieces about the culture of erasure in Silicon Valley. Congressional hearings were announced. The Securities and Exchange Commission launched an investigation into whether David's company had misrepresented its origins to investors. The lawsuits came next. Not just mine, but dozens of them. Other developers, other creators, other invisible contributors who had been erased from their own stories. The legal battles were long and expensive, but this time I wasn't fighting alone. In the end, David Sterling's empire didn't just crumble, it collapsed. The investigation revealed a pattern of stolen ideas, erased contributions, and systematic discrimination that went far beyond just my case. The company lost billions in value, major contracts were canceled, David himself was forced to step down as CEO. The settlement came 2 years later, $2.3 billion. More money than I'd ever dreamed of having. But the money wasn't the victory, the recognition was. My name on patents where it belonged. My story told accurately. My daughter able to see her mother not as invisible, but as the innovator I'd always been. I used the settlement to start my own company, focusing on creating opportunities for underrepresented innovators. I established a foundation that provides legal support for people fighting to reclaim credit for their work. I speak at conferences now, telling my story, encouraging others to speak up before 20 years pass. David Sterling filed for bankruptcy last year. He's facing criminal charges for fraud and tax evasion. His marriage to Catherine lasted exactly 6 months after the wedding. She said she couldn't trust someone who had built his entire life on lies. I don't take pleasure in his downfall. I really don't, but I do take satisfaction in the fact that the truth finally came out, that my story is finally being told correctly, that my daughter grew up watching her mother fight for what was right, even when it took 20 years to find the courage. Jasmine's story reminds us that the truth always finds a way to surface. If this story moved you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Hit that like button if you believe everyone deserves credit for their work, and subscribe for more stories of people who refuse to stay silent. What would you have done in Jasmine's position? Let me know in the comments below. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to be invisible anymore. Sometimes justice takes 20 years, but it's never too late to speak your truth.